Welcome. I'm Bob Gorel, Executive Director of the Maryland Interagency Commission on School Construction. I will be joined in presenting this webinar by IAC staff members Alex Donahue and Cassandra Viscara. This webinar is the fourth of four and describes how the measures and calculations required to create a score of a facility's relative educational suitability can serve to provide both planning and maintenance management information that is essential for efficient facilities management. Thank you for participating in the sharing of this foundational information that we believe will strengthen the understanding of the many concepts that will be discussed at length in the upcoming meetings of the work group on assessment and funding of K-12 school facilities. We encourage your questions, and you may submit them throughout the presentation. You will see a white box on the right of your screen with Q&A at the top. Please enter your questions there, and we will attempt to answer them with the presentation material, or we will answer them at the end of the presentation, and we will continue to take questions until we have addressed them all, or up to 1 p.m., at which time we will hard stop. The purpose of a school facility is to support the delivery of educational programs and services. In Webinar 1, we discussed the importance of portfolio management and the scale advantages that can be captured. Yet measures begin with each facility. By viewing individual facilities' relative facility conditions and deviation from educational sufficiency, along with cost of ownership, we obtain an opportunity to improve the portfolio over time on a school-by-school basis. In Webinar 2, we discussed total cost of ownership. Without viewing each facility and the portfolio as a whole through the lens of fiscal sustainability, otherwise what we term as affordability, this may not be possible. Total cost of ownership is mostly dependent upon the size of the asset and the cost of maintenance and operations over its expected life. Good and comparable measures and data are required to make sound investment decisions for each school facility in the portfolio, and especially when considering a new, replacement, or renewal facility decision. In Webinar 3, we discussed that the work of owning and operating a school facility is much more than the routine work of paying utility bills and tending the facility by adjusting fan belts and keeping it clean. Good stewardship is also about knowing when to replace primary building systems and their components so that the total cost of ownership of each facility is minimized and avoid the trap of reactive maintenance. In this fourth webinar, we will dive deeper into how the measuring tools for facility condition and educational sufficiency serve multiple facilities management purposes. For instance, we will discuss why a facility's aggregate facility condition index score, a measure of the overall facility's physical deficiencies, can provide a score important for strategic prioritization, and this score can be used to compare one facility against another. Newton's law states that everything tends towards chaos. Otherwise said, everything decays, and this is certainly true of school facilities. A school facility is fully functional only on day one, and that is if it was designed and constructed perfectly and operates as expected. Facilities management is the business of maximizing facilities investments and must employ fiscal sustainability ownership practices and rely on good people and good data. Good data includes periodic assessments of each facility, although this will only deliver value with skillful analysis and deliberate use of the information.
Buildings will not teach our children. Facilities only support teaching and learning and can only do so effectively when they provide an environment that is safe, healthy, and supports the educational programs. Each space in the facility must have basic minimum attributes, such as a reasonable amount of space and a useful configuration. Just as important, the facility must also be in a condition that facilitates rather than hinders teaching and learning. Because all facilities deteriorate over time, we periodically have to assess the facility condition and educational sufficiency to identify emerging deficiencies to plan ahead. From the point of identifying an issue and moving forward on a repair, replacement, or a new school facility, it takes about 5 years, and only if there is sufficient funding. The better the information and the higher the need, the more likely it is that a project is funded. By assessing facility condition and sufficiency, governmental decision makers, and even more importantly, the voters, can see and understand and therefore support the need for critical projects. To assess educational deficiencies of a facility, we separately assess two very different but equally critical components: physical condition and educational sufficiency. Physical conditions are measured and result in a facility condition index. This measure looks purely at the bricks and mortar elements of a facility. The second measure, educational sufficiency, looks at the usability of the space for supporting the delivery of education. Both elements must be considered in order to understand how well a facility functions for educating children. A brand new warehouse, for example, might get top marks for facility condition, but probably wouldn't provide sufficient spaces to educate children. Maryland uses a homegrown measure of facility condition called the average age of square footage that was created before the common use of the Facilities Condition Index measure. This is a great example of Maryland's innovative history, but it does not directly describe the condition of a facility because a facility's condition does not always match its age. An old facility can be well maintained and working well as intended, and a relatively new facility can be quickly worn out to the point where it may not support its intended function. The Bricks and Mortar Facilities Condition Index, or FCI, is such a powerful measurement because it describes the condition, beginning with the facility's major building systems and rolling up into the aggregate facility condition by quantifying the depleted percentage of lifespan. This is as close to an objective measure as we can get. A facility's physical condition, as represented by the FCI, is a key part of determining a school facility's educational deficiency score. We can also use the FCI to project the annual level of funding required to achieve or sustain a portfolio of facilities over time. For example, the slide above could be the results of a particular funding model that demonstrates a hypothetical projected average condition improvement of a school facility's portfolio over time with certain levels of funding. The portfolio FCI score is a more accurate tool to gauge the average condition of our school facilities and is very useful in achieving and maintaining certain results. A facility is made up of many components. The major components are building systems, which include the roof, windows, HVAC, foundation, electrical system, and so on. Each building system has an expected life and, as discussed in webinars number 2 and 3, as a building system approaches its end of life, its reliability and intended function diminish up to the point of failure. The Facility Condition Index, or FCI, at the building system level is the percentage of depletion of the measured building systems. Knowing the FCI of each major building system is important for planning and practicing effective maintenance. We determine a facility's FCI by aggregating the proportionate FCI of each of its building systems. It is important to know a facility's FCI to forecast its ability to perform its intended educational support function and to guide investment decisions such as when to repair or replace a facility. This is especially important in managing a portfolio as we generally have scarce resources, and knowing where we can get the biggest bang for the buck is very important. In this slide, the pie chart represents a typical building system, such as a 20-year roof that has an estimated 5 years or 25% of its expected lifespan remaining. The FCI is 75% because the asset is 3/4 depleted. The higher the FCI, the worse the condition. To calculate the FCI for a facility, we first determine the full replacement value of each of the major building systems, such as the foundation, exterior shell, roof, HVAC, plumbing system, electrical system, lighting, and so on. The denominator is the sum of these replacement values, and the numerator is the sum of each building system's replacement value multiplied by its FCI percentage. If we want to know the FCI of our facilities portfolio, we similarly aggregate the proportionate FCI score times the replacement value of each of its facilities.
The sufficiency standards are not what we would use to design a new school. They describe the minimum attributes needed to deliver the educational programs and services required by the state. As we have said previously, to assess the educational deficiencies of a school facility, we separately assess two very different but equally critical components: physical conditions and educational sufficiency. We have already described how we measure the physical conditions. Now we will discuss educational sufficiency. To measure the educational sufficiency of a facility, we assess certain key attributes of the spaces within the facility against the Educational Facilities Sufficiency Standards that the IAC adopted in 2018. These standards were created by a thorough collaborative process over 2 years. They are non-mandatory, qualitative and quantitative standards describing the minimum facility attributes needed to deliver educational programs and services required by the state. These standards are based upon traditional practices of educational delivery. Their purpose is to identify deficiencies in existing facilities, not new facilities, that substantially inhibit the delivery of educational programs and services. An example would be the standard stating that the facility should be able to maintain classroom spaces at a temperature of 68 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. When the temperature routinely remains outside this range in a given space, a deficiency is identified. Using the standards, we can establish a comparable measure of deviation from bare minimum educational sufficiency for an existing school facility at the point in time at which the measurement was made. We must periodically measure the educational sufficiency of each facility over the course of its service life in order to ensure that each school continues to support teaching and learning. A facility's score will be dynamic and will be adjusted by factors that change over time, such as enrollment and the natural depletion of building systems that directly affect education, such as temperature control and the building shell, which keeps Mother Nature at bay. This information can be useful to LEAs for informing their public and governing bodies about relevant deficiencies that merit their consideration. The sufficiency standards include both qualitative and quantitative standards. The qualitative standard for a roof is that it is weather-tight under normal conditions with routine upkeep. If a roof is continually leaking over time despite attempts to stop the leaks, then the roof will qualify as a deficiency, regardless of whether it's only 5 years old out of an originally expected lifespan of 20 years. As was presented in Webinar 3 on maintenance, routine maintenance cannot prevent failure when a building system has exceeded its useful life. And sometimes building systems of insufficient quality are built into a facility right from the start. Cheaper is not always better, and this type of issue is unfortunate but avoidable by careful planning through the lenses of total cost of ownership, which we discussed in Webinar 2, and careful monitoring of the facility's construction. Nevertheless, when a facility is not educationally sufficient, learning is impeded. Regular and impartial facility assessments of each school facility every 3 to 4 years, as provided through House Bill 1783, using the sufficiency standards, will identify emerging problems and provide an educational sufficiency condition score for each school that is comparable to all other schools. The size of various spaces is one facility attribute in the standards that will be measured in each facility assessment. When it comes to an attribute like size, say, of regular classrooms, a quantitative standard is used, in which a minimum net square footage per student is applied. Classrooms not meeting this standard are likely to present obstacles to teaching and learning because they will be too cramped from the perspective of traditional classroom configuration and use. Of course, how cramped a classroom is depends on how many students one is trying to serve in the space. The standards are based upon the state's standard expectations for class sizes. However, because these class sizes are not mandatory, LEAs may choose to operate smaller or larger classes as suits their needs and objectives. A final point to emphasize about the sufficiency standards is that they will evolve over time as state-required educational programs and services evolve. House Bill 1783 requires that the IAC periodically review and update the sufficiency standards.
Assessing school facilities against the sufficiency standards only identifies problems that should be addressed because they are likely to reduce the ability of the facility to support its intended purpose, and that is supporting the delivery of education. Assessing against standards does not infringe upon local control because the standards neither specify any particular solutions nor do they mandate that deficiencies necessarily be corrected. It may be that deficiencies can be mitigated through administrative solutions until it makes sense for the facility to be completely renovated or replaced. In any case, the decisions belong to the facility owner, and that is the LEA. Here's a basic example of how we will assess general classrooms and create a deficiency value if there is a deficiency. The solid green area on the left slide represents the existing general classroom square footage for School A, which has traditionally enclosed classrooms. On the right, we see the same total classroom area, but this facility was built as an open plan school. So 20% of the space has been subtracted to account for access traffic and other inefficiencies. Population growth in a community is often welcome, but insufficient learning space will impede the delivery of education. The dotted blue lines represent the minimum sufficiency standards square footage for the school's enrollment that has been adjusted upward to represent the population 5 years forward. Any likely future growth must be factored into facilities planning. This is important because the delivery of building or administrative solutions such as adding a new school or making a change in attendance zones, or both, can take 5 years from the point of problem recognition to the point of problem resolution. The white area between the green and blue dotted lines represents the missing classroom space. To estimate the cost to correct that deficiency, or the value to correct that deficiency, we take the square footage adjusted to include any non-usable space, such as that needed for access and traffic flow, and multiply this by the cost per square foot to build that type of space. Here are a few examples of facility deficiencies that can directly affect teaching and learning. Of course, if a facility provides an unhealthy environment, such as due to very high or very low indoor air temperatures, contaminants such as asbestos, or a leaking roof or window that now grow mold, then the facility cannot support education, as it should not be occupied. In the previous slide, we demonstrated how we assess and create a value to correct a deficiency of general classroom space. Not having enough of other types of spaces can also impede learning. Learning can be impeded by many other sufficiency standard deficiencies, such as poor acoustics, poor lighting, insufficient outlets to plug in needed equipment, insufficient internet access, unreliable temperature control, carbon dioxide levels that make us sleepy, and many more. We could continue for an hour describing conditions that are not conducive to the delivery of education. This said, we also know that there is no perfect learning space and that teachers are amazingly resourceful as they overcome issues and obstacles to accomplish their work that other professions likely cannot even imagine. And this is a good thing. Yet to keep every teacher and every student in every school in a decent environment means that we must know the worst deficiencies and endeavor to correct them. Therefore, it is important to weight each identified deficiency based upon its impact on teaching and learning.
So, why should we weight deficiencies differently? Because not every deficiency has the same impact on teaching and learning. In order to apply our scarce resources to best effect, we must weight more heavily the deficiencies that are most detrimental to teaching and learning. Just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are some facility attributes that are basic or essential, and without them, teachers cannot teach and students cannot learn. Weighting prioritizes the deficiencies at the bottom of the pyramid to ensure that students are in safe and healthy environments. A student in a facility without air conditioning or heating will be unable to learn when it is too hot or too cold, so this deficiency should be weighted heavily. A student in a crowded facility will also struggle to learn, so this might also be heavily weighted. Other weighting categories might protect the facility asset. Deficiencies in a building system that cause damage to other building systems, for example, such as addressing a window that leaks, obviously aren't as critical as making sure that a child is warm, safe, and dry, but are still important because the damage to other parts of the building can cost serious money to correct. These sorts of deficiencies might be weighted, but perhaps not as heavily as a health or safety issue. Regular assessments are also important, and weighting must match the issue. For instance, in the example of the leaking window, if the condition worsens because leaks cause dangerous mold, the weighting should be elevated to the code life safety and health level.
To reflect the overall needs of a given school facility and to enable comparisons of one facility against another, we weight the condition deficiencies and the sufficiency deficiencies appropriately, and then combine them to create a weighted deficiency score. Such a customized deficiency score in Maryland could be called the Maryland Condition Index. Because facility conditions change over time, we must reassess each facility's condition and sufficiency at least every 4 years and mathematically adjust each facility's score annually to keep the score as representative as possible.
Every child in Maryland should have a seat in an educationally sufficient facility. Without a deficiency score for each facility in the state, we will not be able to objectively and comparably identify the greatest needs for corrective action in order to become educationally sufficient. Pursuant to authorization in 2018 by the General Assembly, the IEC is proceeding to conduct a statewide assessment of the condition and sufficiency of all public pre-K through 12 facilities in Maryland. Upon completion of the assessment, Maryland will have comparable facilities data that will allow the state to more accurately quantify the existing need and provide critical information to the LEAs for prioritizing their limited resources for the greatest return on investment.
A Maryland Condition Index can be a primary measure of how we in Maryland are doing in our stewardship of our public school facilities, and can help us identify what steps could or should be taken next. The best solution in a given case might be quite different from that in another case. For example, in an LEA with underutilized and problematic facilities in a given area, it might make more sense to build a single replacement facility to serve all the students in that area, which could yield a much lower total cost of ownership and better meet the educational needs for decades to come. In contrast, an LEA experiencing substantial enrollment growth across an area might need to retain and renovate or even expand a number of existing schools in order to meet the projected demand. A weighted educational facility deficiency score is a powerful tool for individual, school, and portfolio planning and informed investment decision making. A facility condition index score, which is a subset of the educational facility deficiency score, is also extremely valuable because it gives a school district the ability to estimate and forecast the cost of maintaining conditions over time. Regardless of the value of these informational tools, decisions on what is best for an LEA's investment must be made locally by the LEA and for the good of the entire portfolio, their community, and ultimately every child in every seat they serve. With the tools provided through this assessment, decisions at the local level can be better informed, and the public can trust that decision makers at all levels have meaningful measures of facilities conditions. Ultimately, we all agree we need a healthy, safe, and educationally sufficient learning environment for every child in every seat in Maryland. Keeping our facilities educationally sufficient requires that we maintain them, and by measuring our maintenance effectiveness is how we improve our level of success. Good measures will also help us estimate the resources needed to do the work properly and how we can do it better. This is all part of getting to fiscal sustainability in educational sufficiency. This has been the last of our 4 webinars that precede the Assessment and Funding Work Groups meeting, and we hope they have been informative. Thank you again for joining us today. The work group meeting is scheduled for August the 28th at 9 a.m. in the Senate building. We hope that you can attend that meeting, and if not, it will be broadcast and a recording will be made available on our website. The same as this recording of this webinar. Now we will answer the unanswered questions received during the webinar, and we will take any additional questions that you may have. We'll keep the webinar open for 2 to 3 minutes after the last question received, or up until 1 p.m. when we are scheduled to end, whichever occurs first. If you have questions after we sign off today, please send them to the address on the slide. And if you have colleagues that were not able to attend today, please send them to our website. We thank you. So far, we have no questions. We will sign off in 2 minutes from now. This question says, in general terms, can you describe how you will calculate FCI? Yes, and that we described, let me get to this slide, on slide slide number 8. First we measure, let me back up. We first measure FCI, and describing that on slide number 4, which is the facility condition index, and 2, the educational sufficiency deficiencies. We add to the value repairs or deficiency of the facility physical condition. Those 2 are added together and weighted to create the efficiency. How we measure the sufficiency, if we can go to slide 8, which is added to the FCI, is by taking the sufficiency standards and what these bare minimums might be and adding them to the and comparing them against the existing facility. And I do have the wrong slide up. Let me go backwards. One good example was on slide number 12, where we were looking at a building system level as the FCI comparison for the, yes,
This one here.
where we're, how you will calculate the FCI. Thank you, that is the right slide. So the FCI is the amount depleted. This is on slide number 12. And that you can see is that this is a representative, this number 6, I'm sorry, slide number 6, is representative of a roof. This example, as we spoke through it, that would be 75% depleted. So it may be a 20-year roof that has it's been used for 15 years, but in any case, it's a 20-year roof that has 5 years left on it. It could be a roof that was only put on 5 years ago. But the FCI represents the remaining life subtracted from the intended life. So the remaining life is only 25%. We take the intended life remainder, which would be 75%. That is the FCI. Could you try again on that? I think I said that very confusingly.
I think that's it. In other words, by looking at measuring the depletion on a system by looking at its remaining life, we use an FCI which reflects the depleted amount, and we can quantify that in dollars and put it over the full replacement value to create the FCI percentage. In this case, 75% for a roof that has 5 years left out of a 20-year lifespan.
And we want to compare that against how FCI is talked about sometimes, and even some of the assessments that have been made statewide, in that it is a project cost. So the FCI might be, as it talked about, as a repair cost. It includes everything from tearing off the existing HVAC units to running new electrical to new brickwork sometimes. That is not the essence of an FCI, and that's why we talk about the FCI being a depleted value and a remaining value. And the depleted value is the FCI, in this case 75%. We take each of those systems within a facility and we add them together, and that becomes the numerator. So an FCI percentage, the depleted value times, in this example of the facility level, times a replacement value of the HVAC system would give us a value that we add to the roof, the foundation, which might be 100 years, and all the other major building systems. And then we divide that by the replacement value of those same building systems at 100%. And that gives us a weighted, based upon the replacement value of each of the systems, that gives us an FCI that is appropriate to that facility.
One follow-up point on that is that, as Bob mentioned, we do not use an FCI that is based on the full replacement value of a facility. It's based on the key systems, which could be 10, 15, 20, 25 different systems. We have 3 examples listed here: HVAC, roof, and foundation. And those are the systems that are assessed for depletion and against replacement cost, which may not add up to the total cost of a brand new complete facility, because not all of the systems and components of a facility are essential to educational sufficiency and to delivery of teaching and learning.
And that's an important point to make, Alex, because what we don't want to do is give the idea that this is what it's going to cost to go repair anything. We want to identify that there is a problem, and then how that problem is resolved is a separate issue that should be managed on a case-by-case basis, and that's why we measure it like this. Question was, will you email PowerPoint presentations? No, but we will have them available on our website, and along with our notes, our talking notes, so that you have the full information that we presented. We'll also summarize the questions and answers that we have given, both during the presentation and any that we receive afterwards. You may send those questions afterwards, and we'll put that slide back up to the web address that is iac.msde@maryland.gov. Question is, are you in a position at this time to define the standard that you will use to define the life cycle values for each building system? And the example given was Building Owners and Management Association. And how will you identify building systems? And an example given as uniformat. We will define building systems with the successful vendor of the assessment. And we will determine in the examples, we have 9 schools that we will assess as examples in the state over the first 60 days of the assessment. And with that, we will determine which major building systems should we concentrate on that will give us the best representation of a successful and properly functioning school. We'll work those back with all of the LEAs. And again, even though we've identified those, we will find facilities that have different important systems, and they must be assessed with those different systems. We'll be using BOMA standards coming out of the box for what the expected life is of each of the building systems. But that is just for initial estimating and forecasting of when things might break so that we can project into the future what the cash flow will be required to maintain a certain FCI. Those will be the what if reports that'll be so powerful for forecasting both locally and at the state level. How much do we need to keep putting in to do systemic or building replacement work, for example? And then will we categorize those in uniformat? We don't intend to categorize them in uniformat at this point in time. However, as we move forward with our facilities assessment system, as well as particularly the solution side, it will be important that we eventually get to a point of capturing, at least at the level 1, possibly the level 2 level of uniformat, what those costs of repairs are. That will allow us to understand the full cost of a project solution and be able to compare from LEA to LEA and separate such things such as site that can be so different from one building project to another. But look at building shell, for example, on a comparative basis between different projects. That's where the real value of uniformat will come in. And thank you for the question. So we'll close out in 2 minutes if we don't get any more questions. While we're waiting to close out, I will mention that total cost of ownership, which we talked about in our second presentation, we will arrive at a point where we have to develop those total life cycle costs that are available for everybody to use. That'll be a standard. We've already started talking to DGS on how that we can do this collectively. And of course, we will include all of you in the LEAs involved. 1 more minute until we close out. We thank you very much for attending today. If we don't get any more questions, we will close out in just a few seconds. The work group meeting coming up is August the 28th, and that will be in the Senate building in Annapolis. It will begin at 9 a.m. We hope you can attend. We thank you very much for joining us today. Oh, we have another question. Or do we? Yeah, it didn't come up on mine. I see. How does your identification process account for areas of high growth that perhaps do not have lower facility condition indexes, which has a higher weight? Great question, and I will plug the first meeting of the assessment and facilities work group, funding work group meeting, because we're going to talk about that particular model as well as 9 other models. But I'll briefly say that in the projection, and this was on one of our slides I can't point to right now, the population that we use to check sufficiency is not the current population in the school. It is the population that is projected to be at that school based upon growth of the previous 5 years and projected flat line out, unless we have another reason to use a different measure, but we will apply a growth factor to each and every school. If a school has no growth or is declining, that will not count against that school. I'm going to make that very clear. That's a problem that can be dealt with administratively, and certainly over time it's going to be more expensive to operate. The overall condition index scores might help a possible future solution. So the growth factor is only going to apply in areas, and I got to say an area, not just an entire county, of areas of growth. And we will apply that growth factor to each and every school, and that is the population that we will try to fit in the existing school. The insufficiencies of space will be based upon that projected student amount. So we can end up with a insufficient school that's fine today, that's projected to be insufficient 5 years from now, and that will drive the score up. The current draft weighting for a insufficient space, an unhoused student, is 3 times the repair, which is just under our current draft of 3.5 times for a life safety health type deficiency. So it's heavily weighted. They're both important. A child without a place to go to school is in just as poor a learning environment as one that is housed but in a very poor facility that's unsafe. And we sure hope again that you can attend this and look at the various models. They'll be prepared so that we can look at even what ifs. So if other questions come up that we haven't anticipated in our 10 models, we'll be able to handle those and look at just what might happen as we apply this going forward. We want to come out of this first work group meeting with a pretty good understanding of what these weightings might be to be able to use in the assessment. Thank you for the question. We'll close out in 2 minutes again. We'll leave open. Great questions. Thank you all. And they're very important questions. We'll close out in 1 minute. Thank you all very much for attending.